Hello students, so now we will be looking at the second unit that you will need to complete to get credit for English 1 ROC, and that unit covers metacognition and personal connections. So you have completed Unit 1, which is formal correspondence, and now you will watch this video lesson over Unit 2 and complete an assignment for this unit to be submitted. Okay, so let's go through this lesson. So in this lesson, one of the main skills that we talked about was metacognition. And metacognition deals with highlighting and annotating the text. Highlighting meaning the portion that you actually, move your cursor across and highlight. But then the annotating portion is when you make a note about that. And that shows your thinking, which is metacognition. So what is metacognition? The technical definition is the awareness and understanding of your own thought process. So it's thinking about your thinking, and it's an important skill so that you as a reader are able to figure out what you are understanding about the text, and if you are not understanding a part of a text, how you can fix that problem to help you understand better. So the reason we want to highlight and annotate is that it helps facilitate that metacognition, in that it forces you to examine your thought process. So you're thinking about, why did I mark this text? What is important about this particular part? Is it a word I don't understand? Is it a part of the text that reminds me of something in my own life, or something I've read before, or something that I've seen? But it also shows your teacher what's going on inside your head so that he or she can help you improve your reading skills. So that's why it's so important in this portion of the lesson that you not only highlight the portion of the text, but that you make a notation, an annotation, so that I can tell what you are thinking when you mark that text. So highlighting and annotating work together. You can't have one without the other, which I know that's a falsehood. You can highlight a text without annotating it. However, it does not really help you or help the person who is trying to help you with your learning to see how you're thinking and your thoughts, how all of that is working together to help your understanding. So we're going to be doing lots of highlighting and annotating this year, and I think that you'll find that you will improve your understanding of a text because you are noticing what the details in the text, and you notice what you as a reader tend to notice. Okay, so in highlighting, this occurs when you select specific text that you find to be important. It can be done by using an actual highlighter or by underlining that text with a pen or pencil. Since we're working online, we'll be actually using our cursor, putting the right click and dragging it across. And you can, if you would like to make it into a color, you can, and you have all of these colors that you can select from. Or you can also just use the comment feature, and it highlights for you in just one color, and you can add your comment over to the side. Okay, so we'll be practicing that in a few moments. So highlighting is the selecting of the specific text, and annotating occurs when you make a note about something that you've read. And the reason you should do it in class or in your coursework is that it shows your teacher what's happening in your head as you're reading. It helps you also to stay focused on your reading, because you're thinking about also, okay, why did I highlight this in yellow? What was I thinking at this moment? And it helps you to stay focused on the reading task. For our assessment, we'll be using an annotation guide. There are two annotation guides that are almost exactly the same. They're just formatted differently, but let's look at the two. So one, it tells you the steps about actively reading and marking the text. And you may think about, okay, what can I highlight? So you can highlight sentences which reflect a main idea or the author's purpose. You can highlight phrases and sentences that you find interesting or surprising, maybe vocabulary words that you don't know the meaning to, or ones maybe that you see are important or repeated often. Those aha moments, important details that you see about setting, characters, or conflicts. And then phrases and sentences that really make you think and wonder because they maybe are confusing or they reveal something new. And you can look at phrases and sentences that remind you of something outside of the story. You can also highlight striking phrases or sentences which has created a mental image or a visual. And then anything that you notice as far as text features or structures such as chapter titles or visual elements, depending on what kind of text you're reading. And when you do that, this is the second column talks about how do I annotate it. So if you see something with a main idea, you can label it or summarize it. If you find it a surprising or interesting sentence, you can put your note. Your annotation could be what you find interesting about it. If you underlined a vocabulary word, you can define them. So you can actually you can Google it here if you're working via the computer, and you can explain what you think the word means based on the situation and the character. If you've marked an aha or a light bulb moment, as I like to call them, then explain what it is that you just realized or maybe the character just realized. If you marked something about setting or characters or conflicts, describe what you learned about the setting, the characters, or the conflicts. And then if you mark something that or make you wonder, something that's confusing or something that reveals something new, ask yourself a question. And remember, you don't even have to answer it. You're just thinking about what you're thinking about. So if it reminds you of something outside the story, that could be you could describe that connection when you do your annotation. What does it remind you about yourself or other people you know, the world, maybe other stories that you've read, other movies, books, TV shows that you've seen? If we were on paper, you could actually draw, if you marked something that creates a visual image, you could actually draw that visual image. But if you're annotating it, you could just kind of describe what you see in your head. Okay, so moving forward, so you can use this when we're practicing today, and that's going to help you with the assessment because you get points for annotating. And then that after metacognition, so we talked about metacognition, and then we're also going to be tested on making personal connections to a text. So when you can make personal connections to a text, then it's easier for you to understand what's happening, and it's also easier for you to stay focused on your reading. So think about these kinds of questions because it doesn't have to be a connection with the character. It can be with anything that you have experienced. So whenever you're making connections, ask yourself these questions. Can you make any connections to the events from the story? What does this remind me of in my life? So that could be a personal connection. How does this relate to my life? What does this remind me of in another book I've read or another movie I've seen or in a TV show that I've seen? Or what does this remind me of in the real world? And then how did that part relate to the world around me? Is it bring up a current event or an issue that you've heard about in the world? And then think about what kinds of problems are addressed in the text. Maybe you can relate to similar situations or problems or dilemmas that different characters face. And think about whether you can relate to that. It doesn't have to be specific, like that you have to be just like the character in order to make a text connection. It might just be that you can make a connection to a similar feeling that the character has, or maybe the environment that is described is similar to something that you know about. So once you have made some connections and you have highlighted your text and annotated it, you will have 2 questions to respond to about the connections that you have made within a story. And we like to use the APE format because it helps us clearly respond. So we want to have at least 3 sentences. We want to answer the question, and we want to start our answer with part of the question. So key words from the question. We want to offer proof from the text, and we introduce it with our words, which there are some that are listed here that you could use. Then the proof needs to be an exact quotation, and we will be using quotation marks and a citation. And then we will have a sentence or 2 where we explain our thinking about that quote. So what does that look like? Let's take a look at an example. So one question that was asked on the assessment was to explain one of the character's problems. And this answer comes from the mentor text that we read, 11. And I want you to notice the parts of the question. So it says, Rachel's problem in 11 is that she does not speak up for herself when she is wrongly accused by Sylvia Saldivar of owning the sweater. So notice we have character problem, Rachel's problem. We've named her. We have not said her because there are lots of hers in the story. So we want to name the character. And we named something that she has an issue with that we've noticed, but it doesn't say explicitly in the text, Rachel has a problem of not speaking up for herself. Because if we choose that as an answer, that did not show us that we were thinking about the text. And we want our answers to show that we are thinking about the text. So in red here, we have our answer. It says, so this part is answering the question using words from the question itself and identifying a problem that you noticed. Then we have our text, our proof, but notice that we start that with words that we came up with, and we put those before the quote from the story so that it's embedded. So it says, in the story, Rachel tries to tell Mrs. Price that the sweater is not hers, but then we're going to put our quotation marks because this part is exactly from the story. But when she opens her mouth, nothing comes out. We have the proof, and that's text evidence, and it's placed in quotation marks because it is exact words from the story. We end that with a parentheses with the name Cisneros because that's internal documentation, and internal documentation means that we would put the author's last name after the quote. The last couple of sentences will be an explanation of my thinking about Rachel's problem and how this text, when she opens her mouth, nothing comes out, relates to her issue. So I'm explaining my thinking. I can tell that Rachel's timid nature causes her to be an easy target by bullying personalities like Sylvia's and Mrs. Price's. And I think that Rachel would benefit from discussing the situation with a trusted adult. Maybe then she can gain the confidence to stand up to the bullies. So notice this word timid nature goes back to this idea if she doesn't speak up for herself. Gaining the confidence to stand up to the bullies also goes back up to this idea of not speaking up for herself. So you can use this example. It is on the assessment for you to use when as a guide to make sure you have all 3 parts. So let's look at those 3 parts. We have our answer. We have our proof that is embedded into our own sentence with our citation. And then we have our explanation of our thinking. And I noticed I needed to underline that. All right. So moving on to the second type of question that you will answer. The question will read something like this. Explain how a character or situation described in the passage reminds you of a real life person or event. Okay, so what real life person, event, situation can you relate to? And this is an example from a passage in a book called Bronx Masquerade, but notice the format is the same. So it starts with my personal connection answer in a complete sentence. It's about a person from real life, in this case myself. So it's like Greg. I also struggled with math, and it was often the lowest grade on my report card. Okay, so I've identified the character that I'm talking about and my situation that's similar. Now I need to prove that Greg struggled with math. So I'm going to put my own words that come before the quote from the story. When Greg asked his dad if he can play basketball with the Scorpions, his dad said, now I'm going to put exact quotes for my proof, it depended on his next report card. My exact words from the story, and then I have Myers was the author of the passage, so I have an internal documentation. That line from Greg's father reminded me of myself when I was 15 and I wanted to go out with my friends, but my mom said I couldn't until I brought up my grade in math. So this is an explanation of my thinking of how his parents telling him he had to wait till the next report card because of his struggles with school was similar to my struggle with math. So Greg's struggle and my struggle are similar. Okay, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. So let's look at a practice really quickly. And this one actually comes from the real assessment, but we're going to look at it and I'm going to show you how you can address this when you take the assessment for ROC. Okay, so what I think a lot of you struggled with was the technology when you got to this portion of how to highlight and how to make your annotations. So I want to make sure that you see it with this example. So we have all of our details about what the name of the assessment is, metacognition through highlighting and annotating. Let's read the directions. The following selection is an excerpt, that means a shortened version of, from Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson. Now that is a book, so this is a passage. It actually comes from the first chapter in the book Speak. In the passage, the first person narrator, Melinda, details events from her first day of high school. So if it's her first day of high school, she is a 9th grader. It says actively read the selection and think, highlight, jot notes, and mark the text to annotate the selection. You may use your annotation guide to help with this process. So you can open that up in another window and have it ready to look at if you don't know what to highlight. Make at least 6 highlights and annotations of the passage to show your thinking as you read. So you can make more than 6, but you need to make at least 6. Okay, so this is from Speak, and I'm going to read through it. I'm going to read it by paragraph, and then I will just kind of think aloud here about how you're going to annotate it. I find my locker after social studies. The lock sticks a little, but I open it. I dive into the stream of 4th period lunch students and swim down the hall to the cafeteria. I'm going to highlight this sentence because I really like this visual. So I'm marking it for a couple of reasons. I'm marking it because I can picture the stream of students. I can picture the students crowding in the hallways. And then also it reminds me of here at College Station High School. It reminds me and then I just also want to make note of, she's a freshman. She says she dives into the stream and swims down the hall. I think there's some puns there. She's using some wordplay with fish, because freshmen are called fish, and the words stream and swim. Okay, so moving on. So she's going down the hallway, she's going to lunch. So all I have to do now, so once I've typed it in here, I hit comment and it's there. Okay, so this plus sign here is for add a comment. Next paragraph. I know enough not to bring lunch on the first day of high school. There is no way of telling what the acceptable fashion will be. Brown bags, humble testament to suburbia, or terminal geek gear. Insulated lunch bags, hip way to save the planet, or sign of an over-involved mother. Buying is the only solution, and it gives me time to scan the cafeteria for a friendly face or an inconspicuous corner. Okay, something I noticed about this, she says something, this sentence here, so I'm going to click right here in front of the sentence I want, and then I'm going to drag my cursor across it. And then I'm going to hit this plus button over here again. The first time I hit it from the top, let me move it here so you can see it. This is when I first wanted to add a comment, I came here to the top, but now that I've already made a comment, I can add it by just hitting the plus button. This sentence, there's no way of telling what the acceptable fashion will be. So it seems like, what was her name, Melinda? Seems like Melinda cares about what people think of her, because she talks about the acceptable fashion. Okay, that makes sense, but still, it's something to note about Melinda. All right, so she's buying her lunch. So she's describing it here. The hot lunch is turkey with reconstituted dried mashed potatoes and gravy, a damp green vegetable, and a cookie. I'm not sure how to order anything else, so I just slide my tray along and let the lunch drones fill it. This 8-foot senior in front of me somehow gets 3 cheeseburgers, french fries, and 2 ho-hos without saying a word. Some sort of Morse code with his eyes, maybe? Must study this further. I follow the basketball pole into the cafeteria. Okay, so I noticed some things. I like this description here, but I notice how she calls this guy that she doesn't know basketball pole, so she gives him a name. So I'm just going to note that so I don't get messed up. That's not his name, but that's who she's talking about, the senior. So I'm just going to make a notation. She calls the senior basketball pole, probably because he's tall. Okay. All right, so I made my comment. I'm going to move on. She is now looking around, so she's already picked up her lunch. I see a few friends, people I used to think were my friends, but they look away. Think fast, think fast. There's that new girl, Heather, reading by the window. I could sit across from her, or I could crawl behind a trash can, or maybe I could dump my lunch straight into the trash and keep moving right on out the door. Wow. Okay, what I'm wondering here, people I used to think were my friends, but they look away. That really makes me wonder, why do they look away? What happened to make them no longer friends and to make her want to run away? So and even worse, she wants to just like run out of the cafeteria. So I'm curious as to what happened to make her respond that way. Okay, meanwhile, next paragraph, the basketball pole waves to a table of friends. Of course, the basketball team. They all swear at him, a bizarre greeting practiced by athletic boys with zits. He smiles and throws a ho-ho. I try to scoot around him. Thwop! A lump of potatoes and gravy hits me square in the center of my chest. All conversation stops as the entire lunchroom gawks, my face burning into their retinas. I will be forever known as that girl who got nailed by potatoes the first day. The basketball pole apologizes and says something else, but 400 people explode in laughter, and I can't read lips. I ditch my tray and bolt for the door. Wow, what an image. So, seems to me she just got in between this fight with these friends. So, Melinda gets nailed by potatoes, when she is trying to avoid trying to go around basketball pole. I'm going to call him the senior. It's shorter. Okay, so that's terrible. I want to also, I'm thinking about how she feels about that. She says, I can tell by her reaction that she is super embarrassed. She's so embarrassed. She flees the cafeteria. I could relate. I motor so fast out of the lunchroom, the track coach would draft me for varsity if you were around. But no, Mr. Neck has cafeteria duty. And Mr. Neck has no use for girls who can run the 100 in under 10 seconds, unless they're willing to do it while holding on to a football. That's interesting. So she's talking about this guy, Mr. Neck. I don't think that's his real name. But that he has no use for girls unless they can hold a football. So this reminds me of a common stereotype between of like coaches, and that they only care about their sports and not anyone else. And I don't know if that's I know it's not true for all coaches, but I do know it's a common stereotype. So I'm going to mark it. Stereotype of coaches only caring about sports and athletes and not other students. So it reminds me of that stereotype. All right. Mr. Neck says, we meet again. Me. Would he listen to? I need to go home and change. Or did you see what the bozo did? Not a chance. I keep my mouth shut. Mr. Neck, where do you think you're going? Me. Nothing. It is easier not to say anything. Shut your trap. Button your lip. Can it. All that crap you hear on TV about communication and expressing feelings is a lie. Nobody really wants to hear what you have to say. Mr. Neck makes a note in his book. I knew you were trouble the first time I saw you. I've taught here for 24 years, and I can tell what's going on in a kid's head just by looking in their eyes. No more warnings. You just earned a demerit for wandering the halls without a pass. Whew, that's rough. Okay, so hopefully I've made at least 6 annotations. If I haven't, I'm going to go back and think about the text some more. Then I'm going to answer the 2 questions that follow. Okay? Now, for you on the actual test that you're doing as a makeup, whenever you read your text and highlight it, I have placed an example that we used in the review today on the test, okay? So it gives you the directions, so you definitely want to read the directions. You want to look at the example. You're going to read the question, and you'll type your answers here in the text box. It should expand for you if your answer, moves past that. And then you will answer your second question is about explain how a character or situation described in the passage reminds you of a real life person or event. So let's just be clear with what your goal is for Unit 2. You will review the slides if you need to, but they're on the video. You will look at the reading annotation guide and use it as needed. And then you will complete this Unit 2A assessment, which will have you annotate the text. You want at least 6 highlights and annotations. Okay, you remember you add the comment with the plus. So you'll read and mark, show me your thinking, and then you will answer 2 questions using the APE format. And it hit the example questions here for you. So 2 questions to answer. All right, guys, good luck. I wish you well, and I will see you next time around. And if you have any questions, ask the teacher, which if you're doing it virtually will probably be me. If not, it will be Ms. Lopez. So good luck. Have a good day.